up, Anthony. I know you said you're tired, but the people demand your voice.
I was not expecting this. The sudden release of the pumpkin spice latte is back.
What?
Is that not what we're talking about?
Are you gonna really talk about pumpkin spice latte stuff on this podcast? You're gonna make a joke about a joke on this show? You're gonna go that deep with me?
That was the big announcement.
Ugh, you're insufferable. Anthony, we're talking about the Zendikar Rising announcement that happened today. We are recording on September 1st, a Tuesday. And did you watch the announcement this morning, the announcement stream?
I caught just the end of it while I prepared some lunch.
All right. I was watching it the whole time. I caught the whole thing, and I assume you've reviewed what happened since then. So we're just going to talk about all that stuff. We're not doing a normal episode. There'll be no Pack One, Pick One. There'll be no discussion of our cubes and how we feel about them. We're just talking about this new stuff from Zendikar Rising as a little treat for our first spoiler, our first taste of the environment. Anthony, I think we have to start with what to me is kind of the showstopper, the flagship of the new set, which is the double-faced card lands.
I think these are super cool, namely because it's been really interesting how many different issues and like different things that Magic has tried to do in the past have just become redesigned so much more elegantly, or so many problems have been solved by having double face cards. So specifically we had those spinner cards where there was like an upside down card on the other side, and double face cards was just such a cleaner implementation of that. And another thing we've talked about a couple times in different contexts is like, well, we have split cards, but they're always instants or sorceries. You can't really have a permanent on a split card because it just adds so much confusion when you put it on the table. So
right, you leave it
by
sitting
just
there
like
and
using,
it's like, looks weird.
Exactly, yeah. Using that same double face card technology, now we can actually have like a land spell, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I am really excited about it. It is, I have to assume this is of the same category of things like the cycling being brought back, and basically like, I feel like this is a byproduct of Best of One, that this mechanic is being pursued, but I'm very grateful for it. As we know, I love to add consistency to my cube and decks whenever I can, and certainly having a card that can either be a land or a spell is a big upside. How powerful do you think these are? We've only seen two so far. Let me actually read the two we've seen. So we've seen a red rare called Valakut Awakening, which is 2 and a red for an instant that says, put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1, or you can just play that card as a tapped red-producing land. No subtypes on that, not a mountain, but it's just a land that produces red and comes into play tapped. And then we have a black spell at uncommon, which is 2 and a black, for a sorcery that says target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card from it with converted mana cost 3 or greater. That player discards that card, and that can be played similarly as a tapped black producing land. These are the two we've seen.
And both of these are both spells on the front side, right? So if anything says, search for a land or whatever, it doesn't count those, right?
Right, yeah. These are spells everywhere but in play, I believe, according to the rules announcements and questions I've seen floating around Twitter. So they are just always instant or sorcery, or obviously we'll see some that are creatures and maybe artifacts and stuff later on too, unless they're in play as a tapped land, in which case they are that.
These both seem extremely powerful to me. I think that if we take the Valakut Awakening especially and try and break that down into a comparison with other types of cards, it's basically just a tapped land that has cycling 3, because you just cast a spell you put on the bottom of your library and draw a new card. But with the upside of, instead of just being, you can cycle this land for 3 mana, you can cycle multiple cards in your hand. So I feel like all that package on just a land that has the drawback of coming into play tapped is going to be a pretty strong card still.
Yeah, I think the closest comparison to this for sure is just Forgotten Cave, which is the red tapped land that cycles for red, right? And this, instead of being a 1-mana instant that just draws a single card, is a 3-mana instant that draws a single card, and also you can turn other cards in your hand into more cards if you want, so it's got some other options on top of it. Ultimately, I do really think this mechanic has a lot of potential to potentially be broken. It's very powerful at being able to just have lands and spells. So far, the two spells we've seen do not strike me as particularly powerful spells. Like, I do think Valakut Awakening on power level is actually pretty similar to Forgotten Cave, which is, I like cycling, but it's clearly not a broken card. And then the Palaka Predation specifically, targeted discard has a storied history in Magic, a very sort of potent ability, but tends to be really potent at 1 mana, sometimes passable at 2. 3 mana is looking pretty sketchy, and this is a 3 mana one that also is restricted in what it can grab, which there's a lot of restrictions kind of stacking up there, making me feel like, not only basically like the cost of of running these cards is going to be, obviously now you have a lot of tapped lands in your deck, which is a cost, but also all of your cards are going to be a lot worse on rate, right? I wouldn't expect them to print a card that is at power level just on the spell side to be worth including in a constructed deck of any kind, and then also just put a land on the back. I'm expecting all these spells to be similarly overcosted like these first two are.
But I mean, there's just so much power in the flexibility. Like, in any limited deck, just putting a tap land to basically draw an extra card is a ton of value.
Well, so Saffron Olive of MTG Goldfish specifically compared these cards to like starting with extra cards in your hand, is what he said on Twitter, because he's like, well, you get to put all these extra spells in your deck that you can then just play as lands if you don't need them. I don't think it's quite that, though. I don't think it's really drawing a card, because these really do just like feel like the cycling lands, which I don't think of as card advantage at all, right? The cycling lands are just, it's a modal thing. And so, like all modal things in Magic, we are trading tempo for options, right? It's a very common trope in Magic. You trade tempo for value, right? You basically say, like, it's honestly not that far off from mana fixing, right? Like, a tapped land that produces multiple colors of mana allows you to run more better cards in your deck at the cost of that tempo. And this basically gives you that flexibility to, like, never be mana screwed, or very rarely be mana screwed, or never be flooded out, because you have all these like options. But the cost is going to come on both sides, I think.
Well, I think you could sort of err in either direction depending on how you build your deck. Like, if I was building a limited deck, I would probably just draft these relatively highly, especially if they were on color, and then just play them as a replacement for a land. And what that means is if I just draw them on turn 6 when I already have 5 lands in play, I don't need my 6th land, it's just a free spell. Even though it's not like exactly the spell you might want, but being able to cycle it or get this sort of like clunky Thoughtseize kind of card, it still basically lets you turn those extra land drops that you don't need anymore into a real card. So yeah, I mean, like you said, it's actually pretty similar to the cycling lands in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'm careful to call them a free spell because, I mean, the cost is minimal in certain formats. Like you said, in Limited, well, let's take Valakut Awakening, for example. In Limited, I think this card seems very strong for that exact reason you just mentioned, right? Like, if you need a land, you play it as a tapped land. Normal draft decks are not so efficient and cutthroat that, playing a turn off tempo is going to be a huge cost. And you get the sort of free gravy of having this, like, extra spell in your deck that can then, late game draw you some cards and, cycle stuff that you don't need into cards that are good. But, like, Palaka Predation, I don't think I'm putting that in a limited deck. Are you excited to put that in a limited deck?
I don't know how excited I am to, but I definitely will.
Do you think Palaka Predation is better or worse than Memory Leak? Memory Leak being the 2 and a black sorcery from Ikoria that says target player reveals their hand, you discard a card of your choice, and it has cycling for a generic mana.
I think it's probably a little bit better. I mean, the fact that it's just a land drop and I'm just going to probably put it in my deck and replace the land slot and expect to play it as a land most of the time just means it's going to be pretty low impact and something I'm going to be happy to pick up and play a couple of in any draft deck. And I'm using draft as an example mostly just because that's a space that I can grasp a little bit easily like what the cost of having a tap land is, where in different constructed formats I'm sure it's going to be very context dependent, and I have less experience in evaluating that cost.
Yeah, you and I are not so experienced in playing constructed, so I will not hazard to guess how playable they'll be there. Yeah, I don't know. I think Memory Leak is considerably better, and not just because Memory Leak is a colorless card that you put in a cycling deck of any kind in Limited and are happy to have a generic mana cycler. Also, it just seems like most of the time you'd be cycling a card like that because you need to find land, basically. So, you're tapping a land to draw cards, find a land, and this puts a land into play tapped. It seems very similar in some ways. It is overall slightly lower variance to have all of these double-faced land cards than just having cycling on stuff, obviously, because, you could cycle that card early and not find the land you needed. Or, if you top deck it a cycling land late game, you could cycle it and find another land, and you didn't have a spell at all, where here you always get a spell or always get a land. You always get whichever one you want. I'm just still trying to figure out where I land on how big these, overcosted spells, how relevant the sort of costing on these spells is going to be. Some people are kind of already calling this as like the next companion level broken mechanic, which I don't think it is, but I do think it has a lot of potential. It really depends on what they end up printing on the front side of these cards.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I should also say too, I'm glad that we've seen one of these at rare and one at uncommon. I'm hoping we get a lot of these. I'm excited about this mechanic, so I hope we see a bunch of them. So seeing one at rare and one at uncommon already implies to me that we're going to get at least like 10, probably, like 2 in each color, bare minimum, I would guess, maybe, which is exciting because I'm excited about these cards. It's a cool mechanic. Next up, Anthony, is the we also saw more double-faced lands in the reveal spoiler today, and these ones were the pathway lands, which are just lands on both sides. So and these ones do not come into play tapped. So this was a cycle of 6. Weirdly, we had 3 ally and 3 enemy colored pairs that all have, 2 colors, 1 on each side, that just comes in untapped, no drawback, and you just get that mana. What do you think of these?
I think they're very cool. It's really exciting to see such like a unique and interesting set of cards, and especially like again a new interesting way of using double face cards. I think they're pretty powerful. Again, like they're definitely going to always make your limited decks. I think the biggest downside to me is just they do feel a little bit clunky. Like just when you draw your hand, you're looking at what's there. You're used to what a dual colored land looks like in your hand. So I don't know if I'm going to expect to actually put them into any cubes, just because it feels almost maybe a little bit too out there, and it's like this extra mechanic that takes a little bit more cognitive load than I want in the environments that I'm working on. But I do think they're quite powerful.
Yeah, they're really good. I mean, that one is... I agree with you. It does feel stranger to have lands on both sides because it feels kind of arbitrary as to which one's on the front side.
Right.
Like the double face cards that are lands or spells on the front and lands on the back. It's like, all right, that makes sense. Here's the thing. There's a little indicator in the bottom left that says on the back side of this card you have a land, which seems straightforward enough. But I agree here. It's weird. It's like just strange that there are lands on both sides, but one side has to necessarily be the front. It just seems kind of awkward. I don't expect to cube them. It's funny. When I first saw these, my first thought was just that this is very, very, very close to just being strictly better than basic lands, right? Because these come into play tapped, they produce colored mana, and they give you access to one of 2 choices as opposed to just a single colored mana that you get from basics. And I've listened to Drive to Work, I know you have before too, and I've heard Mark Rosewater talk about how, they always try to avoid printing lands that are better than basics, right? Because they don't want to negate the role that basics play in Magic, because and just make them completely irrelevant card type, which obviously very early on, the actual dual lands from Alpha and Beta broke this rule. There was a cycle of legendary lands from Kamigawa block that also broke the rule, except they were legendary, so that's a downside in and of itself. But here, this is very, very close to just being better than basics, which I think is interesting. And then my second thought was, these are very, very close to being better than basics, but also I think are worse than most dual lands that are, available in Eternal formats. I don't really expect these to be played much in Legacy, for example, or even, Modern, a format which doesn't have access to the, ABU duels, just because they, they're not fetchable. They're still non-basics, and there's a lot of actual non-basic hate in Modern and Legacy. There's relevant things like playing around Blood Moon, so that's a thing that comes up. It just seems like they found this space that it's like very close to like breaking that rule of being better than basics, but actually probably is not broken, which is an accomplishment, I think.
Right. Having to make that choice one time when you actually play the land is definitely very minimal cost in some contexts, but in some other contexts where you have much more aggressive mana costs, they are going to play out much worse than a dual land, possibly even more than one that comes in tapped.
What do you think about using them in Battle Box?
That crossed my mind a little bit as well. One of the things I know we've been talking about, Brian DeMars' Battle Box and how he introduced the Thriving Lands as a replacement for the Guild Gates. But he still uses those tokens to sort of indicate, like restrict you to only having a certain number of each color source, which I'm not actually sure how important that is.
Right.
I don't know. It crossed my mind, but I sort of wanted to think a little bit more holistically about what kind, like having a set of these actually allows you to do.
I guess having a set of them in Battle Box is kind of weird because you might as well just give some people 10 of each basic.
Right, and just say, well, you have a choice of playing.
And say you can only play 10 lands and then you're done, It's basically the same thing. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Take it back. Stupid. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about surrounding the double face cards, Anthony? That's by far the most exciting mechanic in this set for me. I love lands. I love double face cards. Double face cards are just very evocative for me. I love all the meld cards and transform cards. They just feel so cool. The foils stay nice and flat because they're foil on both sides. Very important detail there. But anything else on these double face lands jump out at you?
Yeah, I mean, again, I feel like this idea of what if we had a dual land that you just chose one or the other when it enters the battlefield is something that I've heard a lot of people suggest before, but I had never considered this implementation, so it's a cool way that they're using the double-faced cards. Do you actually have any double-faced cards in any of your cubes right now?
Yeah, I do. My cube has Flip Jace from Origins, and until very recently had the 5-mana Avacyn that flips into that red Avacyn. I think there's a couple others, too. I can't think of them off the top of my head. Definitely the Jace. Oh, and Kythian from Origins as well. Kythian. Yeah. There's a couple in there. I do like them, and I'm unnaturally drawn to them whenever I get a chance to play them. So, all right, let's keep moving. Next up is the second new mechanic, in addition to the double face cards, including lands, is the party mechanic. This is basically I don't know how to describe it. It's a mechanic that counts creatures of specific types. So It's a
So it's
mechanic
sort of
that,
like the batching mechanic in Dominaria of Historic that cared about sagas, legends, and artifacts.
yeah, it's a cares about mechanic, but what it cares about specifically is whether you control at least one cleric, one rogue, one warrior, and one wizard without any overlap. You can't just slap a changeling down on the battlefield and say you control all four now. And then you get various incentives or discounts on spells for having all these different things in play. This is kind of a like flavorful call out to having assembled your whole party of adventurers, which is interesting, but the mechanic itself is not my favorite. How do you feel about it?
I mean, I always love that we have the creature types as just sort of this really open-ended aspect of the game where it doesn't mean anything specifically to the card itself usually, except for giving it some flavor, but other cards can sort of latch onto it and ask you to care about it in a different way, which can push your draft in a different way, push you to build very flavorful decks. That being said, I think I'm going to enjoy playing it in Limited and probably not going to see it in any other contexts.
I appreciate the flavor implications of the creature types, and mechanics that use that can have a very flavorful feel to them, but mechanically my like game designer brain is more just annoyed by them. Like I like the mutate mechanic, but mutate only working on non-human creatures is just this little annoyance to me that just, somebody at some point is going to try to put a gem raiser on an Avacyn's Pilgrim in my cube. I know it's going to happen. So that's like a little bit of an annoying thing. And I feel like this is kind of similar. It's this little like fiddly accounting mechanic where it's like, did I get all of these things? And you got to like count them all up. I don't know. Not my favorite thing. The one card I do want to call out is Tajuru Paragon, which we've seen. It's a 1 and a green for a 3/2 creature that counts as an elf, cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. So has all of the creature types relevant to party. And then has Kicker for 3. We'll get to Kicker in a second, a returning mechanic that if it's kicked, basically looks at the top 6 cards of your library and gets a creature of any of those types. We're getting a bunch of 2-mana green creatures in the past few sets that just as a baseline, like their vanilla stats are great. This is a 2-mana 3/2 with, pure upside, which is similar for the like Crawl Harpooner is a similar thing. That was a 2-mana 3/2 with Reach, I believe. So that's another
with
one.
Reach,
in this
and an ETB fight effect.
Right, yes, that as well. I'm just saying, the base body and just even regular stats is very good. And then here, slapping Kicker on that and Kicker draw a card, a good card that you probably want to draw, seems like it could be good. But yeah, not my favorite mechanic personally.
Fair enough. Not your party.
Speaking of my favorite mechanic, we have both Landfall and Kicker returning. 2 mechanics. I love both of these mechanics a lot. So first, let's start with Landfall. So we get Landfall coming back. We actually have seen not too many new Landfall cards yet. We know that we're getting a Lotus Cobra reprint, which was kind of their like big showcasey card for this. We have seen the new Nissa, however, Nissa of Shadowed Boughs. And Nissa is now Golgari in this set. So it's 2 black-green for a legendary Planeswalker Nissa. And this Planeswalker has Landfall on it. The first time we've seen that. And it says, Landfall, you put a loyalty counter on Nissa. So that's very cool. And then she has 2 abilities. She has a +1, which untaps a target land you control, and it becomes a 3/3 elemental creature token with haste and menace till end of turn.
That sounds familiar.
Just till end of turn. Stays a land. And then it has a -5. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So kind of clunky, but it basically says you get to cast a creature spell from your graveyard or hand for free, and then also it comes in a little bigger. You're not really going to be cheating stuff out because it cares about the number of lands you control, so it's something you probably could have cast already, but just, lets you multi-spell and do multiple things in a turn. Starting loyalty on that Nissa is 4. So first Planeswalker with Landfall on her.
Pretty cool.
This is interesting Planeswalker space for me because it is a Planeswalker that does not in any way protect itself, right? I mean, this comes down on 4, add 4 loyalty, and upticks to 5, but just makes a creature temporarily. Haste and Menace, haste is just there so you don't have to remember which land you played that turn because that'd be annoying, but the Menace on the 3/3 is quite good, so very good, like aggressive Planeswalker, but it's weird to have such an aggressive Planeswalker in black-green to me. I think of that as a very kind of grindy, value-oriented color pair, and this Planeswalker doesn't grind so well because it will be sort of susceptible to being attacked if you are just making tokens temporarily and swinging in with them. It's not going to stabilize on a board. It doesn't really give you the same kind of inevitability that a lot of Planeswalkers gives you.
Well, at the same time, because of its landfall trigger, imagine you play this on turn 4, play your land, and immediately reanimate a creature, and it gets even bigger. That's pretty potent, and if you combine that with fetch lands or any other way to get extra landfall triggers, I think this can actually be quite powerful.
Right, you have to play it on turn 5 if you wanted to play a land,
Right,
assuming
right.
you hadn't ramped or done something else or whatever. But, I mean, yeah, certainly that line of, like, playing her and then playing a fetch land, putting her to 6 loyalty, immediately down-ticking, and getting something of equal CMC to, like, her or whatever you just cast into play could be quite an interesting line. So, yeah, I think it's a powerful card. I don't know what to make of it yet or if it interests me for my own cube just yet. But the showcase art, I have to say, is gorgeous. That card is beautiful, which... what can I say? We're all just shallow people out here. I want to put beautiful cards in my cube. It's definitely appealing to me. So, yeah, it's a new Landfall card we got to talk about. You love Landfall too, I assume, Anthony.
I do.
We
Yeah.
share a love for this mechanic, right?
One of the big mechanics or themes in my cube is lands, and having lands matter in a lot of different ways is very interesting. But it's been a little bit of a challenge in finding things that sort of fit the power level. So some things are a little bit below, some things are way too strong for the cube that I've actually been designing, so I'm hoping to see some more things that are in the middle.
I knew I liked Landfall, but I couldn't really put my finger on why, and then I was listening to an episode of Back to Work once, and Mark Rosewater described why he liked Landfall so much, and he was basically saying, like, what a good Magic mechanic does is it makes you, like, it changes something fundamental about the game, where, some rule that was always true is now no longer always true, and for him it was that, you just hate drawing lands in the late game, right? It's just, when you're on turn 8 or whatever, you have so many lands in play, like you just don't want to draw a land. And what the Landfall cards do is make it so all of your late draws are relevant. Either you're going to get a new spell to cast, or you're going to get a trigger for all of your Landfall cards in play and continue to accrue this value, which is a really beautiful thing about the mechanic. It's great. And I love land matter stuff. I can't explain why beyond that.
And the other returning mechanic also fits with that same idea really well as well, where you can have these scalable threats where drawing lands in the late game can actually be a really valuable resource.
And what is that returning mechanic, Anthony?
It's Kicker, everyone's favorite. The mechanic.
Okay, yeah, Kicker, the mechanic that every other mechanic secretly is. Yeah, Kicker comes back, and Kicker, for all the reasons people know this show will know that we talk about flexibility, we talk about, making things consistent as much as possible, giving players options, and Kicker does all of these things, right? It allows you to have cheap spells in your deck when you need cheap spells, and expensive spells when you're late in the game and have a lot of mana to throw away, and it gives you different decisions about how to sequence your plays and how to sort of line things up, all of which is great. So I'm very excited to see Kicker returning. I will say that I do love Kicker, but I have noticed that Kicker, unlike mechanics like cycling, I feel, has not really gotten as many broken cards over the history of Magic as other mechanics I love have gotten, Like, I also love Flashback. I feel like Flashback, cycling, these kind of mechanics actually have more powerful cards than Kicker has in the grand total of Magic. So I'm excited to maybe get a couple more really pushed Kicker cards.
I mean, I think it's harder to push Kicker just because you're saying, well, you have these two options. They can both be solid at different scales, whereas things like Flashback is inherently some form of card advantage. So if they're trying to cost it in a way that's still appealing and splashy, it's just going to end up being pretty powerful. And cycling, what are the most broken cycling cards? Astral Slide?
I mean, just a lot of the cards with cycling on them are like very playable cards that just they stapled cycling onto, which just makes them much better. Which, I don't know. I think it's had its day where it's been pushed. Even the lands that have cycling on them, I think, are pretty pushed.
Sure. Isn't cycling just a form of Kicker, though?
Yeah, of course. Like I said, every mechanic is Kicker in disguise. This is a fact of Magic the Gathering. There's two Kicker cards I wanted to highlight here, Anthony. The first is the new Jace, which is playing in a very interesting space in a couple of ways. So this is Jace Mirror Mage, which is a 3-mana planeswalker, 1 blue for a Jace. This has Kicker 2. And when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you create a token copy of it, except it's not legendary, and its starting loyalty is only 1, as compared to 4, which the original Jace has. Then, again, we have 2 abilities on this Planeswalker. The +1 is just Scry 2, straightforward. And the 0 is draw a card and reveal it. Remove a number of loyalty counters equal to that card's CMC from Jace Mirror Mage. So Jace kind of bobs himself with the 0 ability. Lets you draw a card, but takes some damage possibly for it if it's not a land or a 0 CMC spell. This is an interesting one for me. Where do you come down on this Jace to your first impression?
I think overall, I'm not dismayed to see planeswalkers that don't protect themselves. I think that almost just makes things a little bit too easy, and just having a planeswalker that you actually have to build a strategy around and find the right time to play it, and maybe set up a couple turns in order to protect it in other ways, I think is interesting. And Jace even more so in that he kind of does protect himself, in that if you cast him with Kicker and get a copy, you might be able to set up a situation where your opponent actually can't attack and kill both of them at the same time. Plus, just the way that you can activate the two abilities together of the two copies to set up your draws. I think it's a pretty interesting card. It's difficult for me to evaluate on power level, but I'm curious to see how it ends up playing out.
Yeah, I find this one to be very difficult to evaluate, too. We're seeing a lot of things we have not seen before. The first Planeswalker with Kicker. I mean, not the first Planeswalker to make copies of itself. Pirate Jace did that as well. But this one doing it on ETB is interesting. I will note that this is one of the only Planeswalkers I've seen that, if kicked, has a enter the battlefield ability, which means that the original Jace enters the battlefield, and then there's ability that goes on the stack. At that point, your opponent could destroy that Jace with a burn spell or removal spell, and you don't get to activate its loyalty ability.
Oh, interesting.
Normally, there's no priority pass to your opponent.
So you're even saying, whereas normally, you cast a Planeswalker, your opponent has a burn spell, they have no timing window to actually be able to destroy your Planeswalker before you have a chance to target it. But in this case, they do.
Right. After the spell resolves, the active player gets priority first, which would be you as the sort of person that's casting a Planeswalker, presumably at sorcery speed. So normally, unless you decide to do something else foolishly before you activate your Planeswalker, there's no window where they can sort of hit it with some kind of removal spell without you getting some value out of it. Whereas this Jace, because of that ETB, you're not going to get priority with nothing on the stack to activate the loyalty abilities until after that enter the battlefield trigger has resolved. Now, it's mitigated by the fact that you're getting another copy of Jace, so if they remove one, you still have the other or whatever, but that is something to note at least, that rules interaction will come up a non-zero number of times, I imagine. I also kind of think that's why this starts at 4 loyalty instead of 3, because just dying to bolt, on ETB if you kick it is not great. Yeah, I think the card is quite good. It falls in this category, though, of just Jaces that generate card advantage and don't really do anything else, like your Jace Balerins and a couple other Jaces, Jace Wielder of Secrets. That one is obviously a win condition, but mostly just card advantage. I'm not particularly interested in the Planeswalkers that only generate card advantage. I just feel like it is not as interesting space to play in, though this one certainly has a lot of weird stuff going on about it, which makes it fun. I just like interacting with my opponent, and this doesn't really do much of that. So
would you categorize this as a lesser Jace?
Oh yes, this definitely goes straight into the box of lesser Jaces. This next spell is not a lesser spell, though. I want to talk briefly about Blooded Chief's Thirst. This is another kicker card. It is a single black for a sorcery that says destroy target creature or planeswalker with CMC 2 or less. So the front half of Fatal Push, except it can also hit planeswalkers, which really is just Ren and 6. So maybe we're getting a clue at like another 2 CMC planeswalker, because I don't think
they're just going to print something
Tybalt.
That's going to make Tybalt really viable.
Yeah, maybe Tybalt's going to become broken in this set. Then it has Kicker for 2 and a black, so making the total cost of the spell 2 black, and then it just says you can destroy any creature or planeswalker instead if you kick it, so not bounded by CMC anymore. I love this card. This is going right in my cube, and I expect will stay for a very long time. The modality of being able to remove an aggressive threat or a mana dork against midrange or something, plus just having a 4-mana Hero's Downfall at sorcery speed, mind you. I do kind of wish it was instant, but I'll take what I can get. I think this is still a great card. I'm really excited about it.
Scalable removal is almost as good as scalable threats.
Agreed. That's kind of all the new stuff we saw from Zendikar Rising. Is there anything else you want to talk about there?
I don't think so.
All right, so a couple quick things we can kind of blow through quickly, I think. We did see that we are getting all 10 fetches as box toppers for those of you that are into weird showcasey versions of things, and box toppers, that's a thing. Also, we had a hint of this earlier, but we have set boosters now, which is a new kind of booster pack, which normally I don't think you or I would care much about, Anthony, because they're not designed to be drafted, and you and I are not ones to crack packs just for fun. But there is an interesting detail of these set boosters, which is that 1 in 4 of them contains a special reprint from what Wizards is very coyly calling the list, which is a list of 300 cards from Magic's history. So basically, we don't have many cards on this list yet. We only have 3 cards that are on this list, and it includes Food Chain is the biggest name on the list so far, which just means you can get kind of random reprints in these set boosters. And I'm curious to see what the rest of this list is. Did you see that part of the presentation itself where Matt Tabak mentioned this list?
I hadn't seen that part, but I saw Morrow talk about it at some online style convention.
Yeah, he mentioned these set boosters a little while ago. The way he was calling it the list was very strange to me. It was like he was making a winking coy nod to the reserve list. Because he said what we're calling the list. And he goes legal's making me say the list. He was very strange about it. And I don't know. It was like a weird winky-winky thing where I don't expect them to ever print reserve list stuff, but if it was ever going to happen, it would be in a product where they're calling something the list and they're putting reprints in it. It just seems very weird. The other thing I could think, maybe if I'm being very cynical, putting my cynical hat on, is that they're introducing something else called the list to like cause namespace pollution for people complaining about the reserve list because they want to detract from that conversation. And just now, if they have their own list that is a separate list, then maybe it adds confusion for people that are trying to figure out what's going on. So maybe that's it, but
that's powerful
anyway.
Technology. I mean, it seems
boosters.
just like a way, like there's this weird cycle of, especially like chase cards for Commander and stuff that get reprinted every once in a while, and there's this like weird flux in availability. So it's just a way for them, I think, to continuously make a little bit more availability of some of these chase cards, which makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I like that. I can imagine this quote-unquote list being cards they add new chase cards to and just, stick reprints of cards from the list and all kinds of weird products like this. That's what I kind of felt like a lot of Mystery Booster was. It was like, we're just going to use this as an excuse to reprint a bunch of cards that we think need to be reprinted. And I'm just all in favor of more reprints for everybody all the time forever. Just keep printing Magic cards.
To be fair, Mystery Booster was also an awesome product and draft experience.
Yes, it was that also.
You could be a little bit cynical about these set boosters and it being like another just like a complicated product and who is this for, but at the same time you see so many people that just like crack boxes and just crack booster packs and they just like take all the commons and uncommons, chuck them in the trash, and they're like, okay, here's my one rare. So just to say, like, let's waste a little less cardboard, and if you're not going to get that value out of those commons, let's just not bother so much with them. It seems like a great idea.
Oh yeah, I'm no problem with a new product. It's just not for me as a person that only likes to open packs when I'm drafting. Otherwise, it makes me sad. Or
I mean, you say that, but I have right here a Theros Beyond Death collector's booster, which I got from my local game store mystery box. That maybe I'll crack that this Friday with the episode.
All right, something to look forward to, listeners. We'll do a live actual crack-a-pack. Then, Anthony, we got a little bit of a preview of upcoming sets. So we saw that we are going to a plane called Kaldheim, or for a set called Kaldheim, rather, taking place on a Norse/Viking-themed plane, which I know many players will be very excited about. This is something that, this along with Wild West, are two things that Magic players have been asking for a lot, so that'll be exciting. Then, after that, we are going to a place called Strixhaven, which appears to be some kind of wizard school in the vein of Harry Potter, I dare say. So that should be very interesting as well. Another big sort of thing that was announced here was a collaboration between Dungeons & Dragons and Magic, which I actually, we've played some Dungeons & Dragons. I don't know much about the lore or any of that stuff or the IP of what exactly is coming to us from Dungeons & Dragons, but we are going to the Dungeons & Dragons plane for a set called Dungeons & Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, which I presume will be great. Looking forward to that. Then after that, 2 Innistrad sets, and they haven't given these formal names yet because they're not coming to the end of next year, but one is going to be werewolf-themed and one is going to be vampire-themed. And we all love Innistrad. Innistrad's very good. Maybe we'll get more flashback cards. Oh, I love flashback so much. Because we didn't get any flashback in Eldritch Moon or any of those sets, right? Innistrad, Shadows over Innistrad, there was no flashback there, right? Was there?
I could not tell you offhand.
I can't remember. I don't think there was. So I think we're due for more flashback in Innistrad. I'm going to call it right now. And then the thing I'm by far most excited for about this presentation, I have to say, double face cards are up there, but we are going to do a Time Spiral remastered set next year, which already would have been one of the more exciting things for me because I have to say, I played Magic a lot when I was a kid, and then I quit like everyone else did for a while, got back into it as an adult, and looking at the original Time Spiral set, which I was not playing for, this was during my period of not playing Magic, it just seemed like the coolest block, and I was so sad I didn't get to draft it, and now booster packs are extraordinarily expensive of it, so like trying to arrange a draft for fun would be silly and extremely costly. So I'm really excited that we're getting Time Spiral remastered. And then, as if they were like, drawing a picture of me on their like market audience board in the R&D room at WotC, they announced that they will be printing some new modern cards in the old card frame for the first time. So we saw a Path to Exile, we saw a Chalice of the Void, a couple other cards, I think, which are going to be in basically the old card frame, which it seems like it has a few minor updates just for like legibility, but otherwise is the old card frame, which is my favorite card frame.
I'm surprised to see them do that. I thought that they actually had just like hard restrictions on not being able to print the old frame because it didn't include all the legal text and like collector's information. But I guess they did it in Mystery Booster as well, so maybe they've figured out some ways.
Yeah, I think it might even have that little information at the bottom. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Find the pictures of these cards.
So this set, it's mostly just sort of the best cards from entire Time Spiral blocks, similar to how they just did like Amonkhet Remastered on Arena, right? But just with a few sprinkled in additional cards to sort of support the format and add some chase cards.
Yeah, they just said that it's a new way to experience Time Spiral, which will feature fan favorites from the beloved set, as well as cards printed with the older border for all of us longtime fans out there. So not a lot of information about that one yet. We know that Gavin Verhey was very involved in it. He was kind of teasing some stuff on Twitter. So yeah, I'm really excited. We know it's going to be a paper product too, which is special, right? Because like previous remastered products like Tempest Remastered and stuff were not paper products. They were just online sets. This will be a paper product. So I'll get my chance to draft Time Spiral, which I'm very excited about. Plus, possibly pick up some iconic cards in an old frame. Though I gotta say, not to be a hipster, but it's a little bit, it's not quite as special to have new cards that are like retconned into the old frame as it is to have original old frames. It's a little bit different. And I'm also curious what the foiling process is going to look like, because one of the things that I love so much about the old frames is the foiling, the way it's done. And I would not be surprised if these had a more sort of modern foiling like the mystery booster cards do that are in the old frame, where it's just modern foiling, but the old frame printed on it. So we'll see what that has in store for us, but still very exciting nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, Modern Horizons was one of my favorite sets of recent memory, and originally, like early in development, the idea for Modern Horizons was, let's do another Time Spiral, like let's make another format, a limited format that has that level of complexity. So to see them bring back the original Time Spirals, and it's really exciting to me.
Speaking of Modern Horizons, Anthony, we also got official confirmation of Modern Horizons 2, which we have basically no information about, except they did go out of their way to tell all the grumbling Magic players that they will in fact be reprinting enemy fetches in that set. So
at long last.
There you go. Everyone gets their reprints. I gotta say, I also really liked Modern Horizons a lot. It was one of my favorite sets from last year, and partially because of the complexity and the cards, but also I felt like what we got in Modern Horizons was a combination of some really complicated cards, but then also a lot of very simple cards that were just a little too pushed, to be stuck in a regular set. There was like basically a cycle of monocolored kind of cantrips that I just loved almost all of them. It was like the Scour All Possibilities, the Fists of Flame, Winding Way. There was one of these in mono cards. All of those cards I felt like were so clean design, such clean designs I really liked. I have we'll talk at some point in the show about, I curate a set of monocolored sort of starter decks, which I aim to be good for teaching people how to play Magic with, no non-core mechanics, just all sort of, vanilla Magic mechanics. And I got a lot of cards from Modern Horizons for those decks, which I was very excited about. So I'm excited if Modern Horizons 2 brings something similar. And I'll also be excited because I felt like Modern Horizons 1, I'm not a big fan of snow, as I've said in a couple places. And so I felt like there was a lot of design space wasted on snow that I was really hoping to see pushed somewhere else. So I'm looking forward to Modern Horizons 2 as a cube owner and a fan of broken cards. And I hope we get some more messed up stuff.
That's a good point. Like, snow is kind of an out there mechanic that didn't really seem like it was totally part of the core identity of the idea of this is a set with like lots of complexity and a ton of different mechanics, but snow ended up being one of the bigger themes. I'm curious what other themes they could do. Like maybe they'll bring back like Affinity or something else that's just too pushed to put into a standard environment.
I think the problem with Affinities is too pushed to put into an Eternal environment too.
Fair.
We'll see. Bring back Storm. I guess they did that too, right? Didn't they print that Storm card in?
There were a couple Storm cards.
Storm Gain Life card, right? In
Weather the Storm.
Right. That was pretty much all we talked about today. They also showed a Yargle secret lair, which I gotta say, I love that they're self-memeing on themselves like that. I appreciate the Yargle secret lair. I think it's stupid and brilliant. There's also a secret lair for The Walking Dead, which is not an IP I'm familiar with, so I don't know how to feel about that. And of course, we got Jace Shoes, Anthony.
Why shoes? Of all the like cross branding things, like if I look at Jace, I don't think that's a guy with nice shoes.
I guess K-Swiss just picked up the phone enough when they called and were looking for brand outreach.
Huh.
Yeah, I have to imagine they're in conversations pretty constantly with all kinds of different brands with a differing amount of enthusiasm for putting Magic IP on their products. And this time around, it happens to be shoes, which I will not be picking up.
Jace Oakley's. Jace Axe Body Spray, Jace.
Wait, you see Jace as a bro? He's supposed to be like the canonical nerd.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
Is Jace a Chad, do you think?
I think Jace is kind of it. I mean, well, we had Gideon, but
I mean, Gideon is the Chad, but is Jace a Chad?
A Chad with a checkered past. Maybe.
I mean, he's got to be one. Jace has to be either Chad or Virgin, so you have to pick right now.
Jace is a Chad.
I agree. He's probably more Chad than Virgin, but that's just us virgins talking. So what do we know? Anthony, anything else you wanted to cover about this announcement on this very special bonus episode of Lucky Paper Radio?
Nothing else. I'm just excited to draft some new sets, especially excited for the Modern Horizons and Time Spiral.
Yeah, I got really hyped. I got more hyped than I expected to watching this announcement today. You know, I'm a grown man. I got stuff going on in my life, but you know, seeing all these cool stuff coming get me very excited. So thank you for tuning in and being excited with us. We will continue to do these bonus episodes if we have time to do them when stuff gets announced. And if you want to follow the rest of the show, find us online at luckypaper.co. Thank you for listening. Thanks to James Nasty for our music production. And thank you, Anthony, for talking to me about magic.
Anytime.